Thank you very much for staying with us. It is still AM Live, and now it's our interview segment. Now, across countries in the world, Nigeria inclusive, of course, there are particular groups of people who come together under the aegis of being non-governmental organizations, meaning that they would not have any form of allegiance to the government, but they would, in their own respective way, contribute to the efforts of the government of their respective countries to the development of their nations. Now, the term non-governmental organization was first coined in 1945 after the Second World War, and that was when the United Nations itself was organized, was formed, established. But of course, this morning the conversation would be on the NGO regulation bill, which is being sponsored by Umar Buba Jibril, a lawmaker from Kogi State, elected on the platform, of course, of the APC. Bill was introduced on June 2, 2016, and of course the bill seeks to provide for the establishment of the non-governmental organizations regulatory commission for the supervision, coordination, and monitoring of non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, and the rest of them in Nigeria, and for related matters. And now we're going to be looking at this bill, which is of course past its second reading, against the activities of non-governmental organizations in Nigeria. My guest this morning is Barrister Segun Olonode. He is a legal practitioner, and of course he's going to be sharing his thoughts on the NGO regulation bill and the non-governmental organizations in Nigeria. It's good to have you join us on the program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming.
I'm grateful.
Now, a couple of days ago, it was on the news as to the fact that a non-governmental organization in Nigeria had helped a 7-year-old boy, Ali Ahmadu, who had been incapacitated by some attacks by the Boko Haram insurgency. He had been flown out of the country, and of course today is working, is doing so well. Now that's a good one on the part of an NGO in the country, but of course there is another side of the coin, and which is around the fact that a kidney transplant victim who is currently in India on treatment actually had another NGO retrieve money, withdraw money from her account. The monies were supposed to be for a treatment and the rest of it. Now, I'd like to ask, from your perspective, what should be the focus or the focal points in the activities of non-governmental organizations in Nigeria or wherever country?
Well, it's pretty obvious that NGOs are, civil society organizations, and basically they are partners in progress with the government.
Exactly.
At the local level, at the state level, at the national level, at international level. And you discover that people set up NGOs as a way of giving back to society what society has given them, by way of privileges, and so many opportunities that they have had within their local community, even in villages, and so on. So NGOs as partners in progress are very, very vital to the existence of any nation, any community, anywhere in the world. But like you said, like some of the instances you've cited, the good, the bad, the ugly, you always discover that there's a need for regulation. There's a need for monitoring. Human beings, and organizations, as it were, left, untutored, left, unguarded, can become something else. And a lot of NGOs in Nigeria, it's unfortunate, the same culture of irresponsibility, financial malpractice that we find in government, we're also finding it in a lot of these, NGOs. People will bring, facilities, equipment from abroad, and when they bring it to Nigeria, they begin to sell it. And if they don't sell it, they give it to their friends and all that. Whereas the people that these things were actually meant for will not be able to get them. But nevertheless, we cannot undermine or underrate the great and tremendous impact that NGOs have had all over the nations of the world. Check out all the people that have made it in business, like Bill Gates and all that. They have NGOs, they have foundations, which they use to channel their resources, their wealth into, promoting well-being all over the world.
Thank you. Now, just before we look at the non-governmental organization regulation bill itself, let's look at how you rightly mentioned the fact that NGOs should be created, because of course we've seen some NGOs be opposite of what they should be in the first instance. They should be such as created to facilitate or corroborate the effort of the government towards meeting the needs of the people. You have some which are formed for educational purpose, humanitarian purpose, and the rest of them. And some that call the government to order. We have examples of SERAP, which has on several occasions called the government to order, tried to question, bring it to accountability. But I'd like to ask you if the presence or the existence of non-governmental organizations, which runs into 100 in the country, there are several of them in the country, if they have indeed helped the government stay on its ground to being accountable to the people. I mean, would you say the governments are similarly hidden behind the fact that there are NGOs which are doing the best to meet certain needs of the people, and of course the government has in a way, maybe not the word fail, but not risen up to its responsibility? So my question is, would you say the government has seen these NGOs as being partners in progress with it, or as some persons who have similarly taken up the responsibility and just feel, oh, some NGOs will do this?
Well, in Nigeria, we have very serious leadership and mismanagement problems. And that is the reason why a lot of Nigerians that have set up NGOs don't really have the support, the necessary partnership and collaboration that is vitally needed by the government. Because you discover that, for example, this civil service mentality is so common in Nigeria. But NGOs are formed by people, they're established by people, they are membered by people that are passionate for change. So, like for example, our organization, GGI, along with SPAV, GPON, Allah, and some other organizations that we work with, we make links, with, your state, for example, we work with the Ministry of Youth and Sports, education, agriculture, and so on. And when we write letters to them, at times it's not really seen as, oh, this is an opportunity, let's embrace it. You write a letter to some of the ministries, and for 5 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, you're not hearing anything. You understand? And yet the passion is there to be involved in really, really working with them. I'm a lawyer by profession, and I'm into media. I have resources, I have people around me that are willing to work. So the degree to which our government cooperates with NGOs is not good enough as partners in progress. And if Nigeria is to see the dawn of a new nation, if you have to experience nationhood as it should be, if you're going to have rapid growth in development, then our governments need to change their stance. They need to cooperate more with NGOs that have the resources, more of the personnel resources, and even some have financial muscles. But there's no way you can compare all their efforts when the government lends its support is much more effective. Okay. So there's a much more need for government cooperation. Okay,
now you've mentioned the fact that the support by the government isn't such as is encouraging to help NGOs thrive, especially those who have genuine intentions. Exactly. Now, I'd like to ask, if you, being a member of, not just being a legal practitioner, but of course being a member of an NGO, would you say that the government isn't seeing the fact that the existence of those people is enough to meet the needs of the people, being that sometimes NGOs are funded by many NGOs are funded by international organizations. As a government, to realize that they are partners and shouldn't and they shouldn't be the ones doing what should be done for the people. I like to put, for instance, the fact that we have internally displaced persons in the northeastern part of the country, and we've had several NGOs go out to help meet the needs of these people, provide for them shelter, health facilities, and the rest of them. Has this in any way brought the government to task? Is this spurring them to do what they should do? I mean, are we open, they're not hiding behind the NGOs to sit back and relax, thinking they're going to be doing what we should be doing for them?
Exactly. That's what I think is, is as if a government that has gone to bed.
That's it.
At every level, you go to our roads, you see the state of our schools, water supply, communication, road transport, mention it. And the NGOs are struggling, even when an NGO is funded internationally. The NGO needs security, for example, to be able to penetrate into the Northeast, be able to do a lot of work. They need support in terms of logistics, in terms of security, particularly in certain dangerous terrain in the country. If the government will wake up to its responsibility, because just to answer your question directly, it appears to me as if our government is like relaxed. What will happen, let's just do our job, civil service mentality kind of thing. We cannot, continue like that. And I want to use this forum to appeal to our government, our leaders, in various, aspects of our national life and within Oyo State particularly, to begin to cooperate, to begin to work hand in hand with a lot of professionals who may or may not have international funding, because everything is not about money, but about resources. That it's possible not to have money and yet to have ideas that can make the equipment and the facilities of the government to come alive and be relevant in, grassroots work or some other work that we are doing in the country.
Thank you very much. And now that will lead us to the fact that the House of Representatives is currently scrutinizing, going through a bill that is being sponsored by its member for the coordination and, of course, the supervision and monitoring of non-governmental organizations, such that there would be an advisory body that they would report to, NGOs would report to, and there would be this same body that would check, assess whether or not NGOs should be created. Certain NGOs should be created. Now, some Nigerians are kicking against this bill, saying that it's likely to, in a way, clamp down on the freedom to associate, to form groups, to express yourself, and the rest of it. I'd like to ask your opinion of the bill being sponsored currently by an APC lawmaker from Kogi State, Umar Buba Jibril, as to the creation of a regulatory body to check the activities, monitor them, supervise them, the activities of NGO.
Well, thank you very much. Personally, I think the regulatory commission that is being proposed to be formed through that bill is completely irrelevant. We have so many laws already. We have criminal law that prohibits people from defrauding, private individuals, public, even international organizations. Apart from the criminal law, we have civil laws. Even the CAMA, the Corporate Affairs Commission, CAC, has its own body of laws, including criminal sanctions for offenses that are done by NGOs. Why do we keep multiplying laws without implementation? That's the problem. And if you check a lot of the provisions in that bill, some are, as a matter of fact, anathema to progress. They'll tell you if any NGO, one of the sections, I think it's section 13.4 of the bill that is being proposed, says that any NGO that is not registered with them, that is not recognized by them, cannot operate in Nigeria. Then it means that the regulatory commission that is being proposed is doing virtually the same work as the CAC, Corporate Affairs Commission. Anything that has to do with registration, anything that has to do with discipline, should be handled by the Corporate Affairs Commission. And they are doing a good job of it. The problem is not with making more laws, but rather putting, action to the laws that are already in existence. That's my candid opinion.
Okay, just to let our viewers know, the bill establishes, the bill of course being sponsored by Umar Buba Jibril, establishes that there would be a regulatory commission which will have an executive secretary and a 17-member council governing board to be appointed by the president for a 5-year tenure term. And of course, the commission will thereafter be employed to issue license requiring renewal every 2 years. The bill will ensure that organizations submit progress and completion report of implemented programs. Now, my guest has rightly said that you feel like it seems it is a duplication of the several other laws that we have in the country. And of course, you're saying you're of the opinion that the implementation of the existing laws should be such as is facilitated to prevent some NGOs from doing an opposite of what they should be doing. But I'd like to put across to you that even with the existence of the criminal law and of course the law that makes for the existence of civil organizations, and of course that prevents for a duplicity of the laws that in existence, with the presence of those laws, we still have some NGOs that are defrauding citizens. I read a couple of minutes ago the fact that an NGO had actually defrauded a kidney transplant victim, and patient, exactly. And of course the fact that there are some that are doing the good things. Yeah. But if we have laws that, well, seemingly are not being implemented, and of course it's making for the thrive of criminal activities, unfair treatment of citizens by some NGO, why then would we want to begin to kick against this bill that, if passed, made into law, would establish for a body that would supervise, monitor, and coordinate the activities?
Because there's already such a body. And that body is the Corporate Affairs Commission.
The Corporate Affairs Commission registers companies.
It registers companies.
Yes.
It regulates their performance.
Exactly.
It has provisions, penal provisions, that can even send company executives to jail. NGO members, NGO leaders, you know, and organizers or whatever that fail to do what is right under the law. Provisions are already embedded there. We have other provisions in the Constitution. We have other provisions in a body of other laws, including our criminal code, to bring people to sanction. Take, for example, our politicians. When they loot our money, they take them to court under the EFCC Act, and there is a provision in the EFCC Act that allows for plea bargaining. But the unfortunate thing is that somebody that has stolen 36 billion will be asked to pay back maybe 5 billion.
Those are loopholes. Those are loopholes. So that seems to be making the idea of looting exactly very great.
Because the laws are there. The problem is that when a man goes to court, having stolen money, you know, invested, taking money abroad and all that, you just ask him to pay a pittance and you release him to go. What you are saying is that, gentlemen, you know, please go ahead and continue the same thing. So all of the cases we have cited, like the guy that worked with the kidney issue, the child is in India needing treatment, the Samuel Benson or something went and used ATM to withdraw money out. You understand? Immediately the police can get in there, arrest the man, check their books, and bring him to book. So if all of these provisions are there and they are not being followed, even at the highest echelon of our leadership, what do you now think the Regulatory Commission on NGOs will do that is better than what is already being done? It is my considered opinion that it will serve no good.
Thank you. We'll take a break, and when we return, the discussion on non-governmental organizations and the NGO regulation bill will continue. Do stay with us. Thank you very much for staying with us. It's still AM Live, and we're still looking at the non-governmental organization regulation bill currently, which has passed the second reading at the House of Representatives in Nigeria. And of course, I said earlier that, well, there are some reactions, counter reactions against this bill, which has passed its second reading. And of course, my guest, Barrister Segun Olonade, has been sharing his thoughts on the bill, and of course, what he thinks about it and what he thinks would make of the freedom to associate and of course create associations, make your expressions known. But of course, while we're still looking at that, another issue that comes to mind is the fact that while we say that the government might not be so able to meet all of the needs, I mean, get to the grassroots, and that's why these government NGOs have been created. Let's look at the fact that currently, with over 100 of them in Nigeria, there are several which seem to perform almost the same functions, many of them around probably for economic purpose, several other probably for education purpose, and the rest of them, all in the bid to helping the government in meeting the needs of the people. In funding, several of them have seemingly have to struggle. How can NGOs thrive? Before we look at how this law probably affects some other organizations in the country, how should NGOs be such as enabled to perform the responsibilities and such that they do not have to eventually be tempted to defraud, as we have in the case of the example we cited earlier?
Well, if I get your question correctly, the first part of the question I seem to be getting is that NGOs need funds. Am I correct?
Exactly. And so how do they necessarily do that without having to cheat on those they're trying to help?
No, there's a difference. There's a difference between cheating on those they are meant to help, because that is greed, that is corruption, that is wickedness.
It does happen, even when they get the funding.
It does happen even when they get the funds. But you see, it's like two questions now. You are an NGO, like ours. You have to do a lot of things, go to secondary schools, go to villages, help farmers, do this. The funds are not there. What do? I, as a person, I put in whatever, God has blessed me with professionally and, through other sources. A few friends here and there, home and abroad, also send, and all that. And that's how most NGOs operate, because the percentage of those that receive international funds, they are really small. The unfortunate part of it, the shameful part of it in Nigeria is that even when these funds come, it gets into their head and they begin to use it for personal reasons.
Isn't that one of the things the NGO is trying to protect?
Precisely, but for goodness sake, it's the same thing that happens in mosques. It's the same thing that happens in churches. It's the same thing that's happening in our body politics. If you pass this law, with all its punitive criminal sanctions and all that, what difference will it? Can you tell me any particular provision in this regulatory commission that does not have other provisions in so many bodies of laws that we have in this country? You know how many chapters, how many sections we have in the criminal code dealing with fraud, dealing with stealing, dealing with siphoning of funds abroad and all that. So we have a plethora of laws, but none of them is being effectively implemented. Now tell me, what is the assurance that it is this one that will now be implemented? Most of the time, these laws are used for personal gains by the powers that be, those that are in control of the power. And if the regulatory body is not checked, in fact, it does not even make sense, because it's a contradiction of the Constitution. You cannot have two bodies, CAC having provisions. For example, there is a particular section, section 15C of this so-called regulatory body that talks about registration and then renewal every 2 years. What is CAC doing when CAC has already made similar provisions for registration? So we now have two bodies doing registering of NGOs in Nigeria. I mean, it's a mockery of the legal process.
And you do not think that with or without the establishment of this act, there would be some caution on especially those who hide under having NGOs to do the seemingly unfair and unheard of things, crimes they commit? Many people seem to be hiding under the fact that it's an NGO, we're trying to help, to even the fraud, isn't the fact that they are supposed to report their progress and the completion of their activities to the board if eventually it is established. Wouldn't that be some kind of some caution on their part?
Organizations, companies, NGOs, civil liberties organizations are also required to submit reports to CAC. If you have an effective head of the Corporate Affairs Commission who is doing what he should do, and the security agents, the police and all that are supporting, we will have a very effective system. But to have two bodies, and the two bodies are legislating the same thing, and trying to implement the same policies on the same organizations, I mean, it's going to become a hydra-headed, a bundle of confusion. That's my candid opinion.
Okay.
It's not as if the regulatory body or commission that is intended is without merits. But the point we are trying to make is that the merits are not needed. The merits will become more of a problem eventually in implementation because provisions have been made in other bodies. And some of these bodies are also being paid by the government. So you are going to take taxpayers' money and begin to pump it into another commission and begin to get agencies for them, get this for them, get that for them, get vehicles for them, when you can empower CAC to do a very effective work, empower the police to do a very effective work, and empower other monitoring bodies that have been set up in Nigeria under various laws to do the same work. That's my position.
Some have said that this attempt is in a bid to frustrate the attempts of people to call the government to accountability, to gag the voice of non-NGOs, which usually would say to the government, serve as watchdog to the government. Is this similarly so? Would you say that this is an effort by the government to shut the people up?
Well, I wouldn't say that that is the intent of Umar Buba Jibril when he was, proposing this bill. Yeah. But I would say that if you give a wicked man an instrument of power, he would twist it to meet his evil ends. And if you give a good man an instrument of the same power, he will find a way of navigating around it to give it a positive and an uplifting end. So, I am not God nor a prophet to begin to look into the mind of the person that is passing the bill, but I am looking at the bill factually and legally and constitutionally. So, if the bill is passed, it has enough traps to be used as an instrument of oppression of NGOs. There is no doubt about it. Because it will now be left to the whim and caprice of whoever is made the director of the commission, together with the executive secretary and the 17 members, to do what they like with the laws that have been placed in their hands. And if you check those provisions, they are too loose. They give too much power to that body that they can do and undo and hinder a lot of good work that NGOs desire to do. But that is not to say that it will not check the excesses of some. So that same regulatory commission can do a very beautiful work, and yet it has room for evil. And given the state of Nigeria and what we know of Nigerians and Nigerian leadership, it's better not to try it.
Okay, now let us look at the fact that a provision of this bill says that the board, if of course established, would be able to allow for the creation of an NGO based on specific recommendations, and of course it could decide not to allow for the establishment of an NGO if it is not satisfied with probably its intent. I'd like to ask from a legal perspective, what should be the basis for the establishment? What should be the criteria you look at to establish an NGO, and what should be the things that would make for the allowance of an NGO to, be created?
To be established. Well, let me say this from the perspective of a lawyer, and the little I know about the provisions of CAMA, which is the body of laws that regulates the activities of the Corporate Affairs Commission, as well as NGOs, businesses in Nigeria. Before you can register an NGO. There are already requirements that are laid down for the registration. Once the purpose is meant to uplift, to bring progress, to bring advancement in any area of human endeavor within the country, whether it is cultural, whether it is social, whether it is economic, whether it is health, whatever may be the area, you are allowed to set up an NGO. But the exception is that the NGO must not have political affiliations or political ambitions. So no NGO will be registered that has, even a name that suggests such things. An NGO will not be allowed as a front for fraud or anything that is inimical to the progress of a nation. So all of these provisions and requirements and checks and balances are already embedded. We register NGOs every day in the course of our legal work, and we know, some of the objections they raise in the course of the registration, including even minors, who are the people that can, be members of an NGO in terms of age, in terms of nationality, and all that. All of those provisions are already embedded in the CAMA.
Okay, so basically there should be a good scrutiny of the intent of whoever or group of persons wanting to establish an NGO. And let's look at section 1, subsection 3 of the 1999 Constitution, which you already talked about, which creates for the fact that any law which is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution, such that the Constitution shall prevail against such law. The fact that we have a part of the law that makes for the right to creating, forming associations, the right to expressing yourself.
It's part of our fundamental human rights.
Human right, of course. Reading through a review, an individual's review of its assessment of the regulation bill is of the opinion that the fact that there are parts of the Constitution that allows for groups to be formed, that allows for people to express themselves, and of course the fact that we have an arm of the National Assembly wanting to create another law that would seemingly disallow for the expression of this law, of this act, or this part of the Constitution to thrive, meaning that we're seeming to have some friction of law in the country. Okay. This has seemingly been the obtained. We've had laws that are established, even with the existence of some other laws. Whose responsibility is this? Will it be to check and prevent the fact that we do not duplicate laws in the country?
Exactly. You see, assuming, for example, that we don't have the Corporate Affairs Commission, and this regulatory body is coming in at this stage, then because there is a lacuna, there is a loophole, there is a gap that the body is coming to fill, it will not raise this much dust. But to have two parallel bodies doing virtually the same thing, and the other one being like a watchdog or like an instrument of oppression, as it were. But you see, I will not agree that the fundamental human right to freedom of association or freedom of expression is being necessarily hindered by the provisions of this new regulatory body that is being proposed. But the fear we have, even look at our press, because the press and the NGOs, they like form the fourth realm of government, who serve as checks and balances, as well as participatory bodies to make a nation better. You discover that this, the press and the NGOs are having problems already, because laws are coming, even concerning social media, laws are coming, out from government to checkmate them. So people are becoming extra sensitive to any other thing that wants to come from the government that could maul, or cage the people's liberty to express themselves. But I don't think that saying, every 2 years you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to submit reports and all that, necessarily tantamount to saying the freedom of expression of the people has been denied. I will not say that.
Okay. So while we look forward to possibly the passage of the bill, or it's been thrown out of the National Assembly, House of Representatives, whatever happens to the bill eventually, what should be the reaction, or what should Nigerians do especially in their effort to work with the government towards meeting the needs of the people? What should they do?
Well, I would strongly advocate that Nigerians should really continue to talk. The essence of a democracy is that people should have the freedom to raise objections, to express themselves in as strong a term as possible in order to correct ills and possible dangers in government. And I want to encourage our government at national and state level to listen to the voice of the people on this bill. If eventually it is passed into law, the truth of the matter is that power still resides in the people to change the government and bring a government with people that understand the need for change and progress, who will reverse the law, setting up that body. Particularly if the body is now formed and it begins to wreak havoc on the people, and the little efforts that are being made to help the nation is now being stunted by this regulatory body, instead of allowing NGOs to take wings and fly and do those things that government has failed to do. It will be a great disservice to Nigeria.
And of course, on the part of NGOs that are already existing, and for those who seek to establish NGOs, more NGOs, what should be the basis of whatever activity to get themselves engaged with, especially in serving the people?
Basically, my personal view is that whatever activity we are involved in, we should have this consciousness of patriotism, nationalism, and integration. We should be able, after all of these decades of independence, we should be able to so work together that we'll begin to integrate all the various tribes in the country together as one, without discrimination on sex, tribe, race, religion, or whatever. A leader of an NGO can be appointed as a commissioner, can be appointed as a minister, can go to anywhere to serve the government. So even before the appointment, they're already doing a good work. And most politicians, before they get there,
because they make promises.
They will form one foundation or the other, one whatever or the other, to tell the people that we are for you. But when they get there, it becomes a different ball game, because the bulk of the people, 80% of Nigeria, is rural, and yet nobody is doing anything about it. And these NGOs are coming up with electrification, coming up with different initiatives to help these people. And enough help is not enough support is not coming from the government. So I finally look at a situation where our NGOs will work a lot towards factors that integrate us. They work a lot to educate people. So when it comes to types of voting, it's not take 500 naira and go and exercise your franchise. It's also a denial of that franchise by making life impossible for people. Not just, in one section of the country, it's everywhere. In the north with Almanjiri, in the south with a lot of youths that don't have good education, no jobs and all that. The creativity, the drive, the passion, the innate potentials of Nigerian youths particularly, are not coming to the fore. And I think these are areas that NGOs should seriously concentrate on.
Thank you very much. Now the conversation has been on the fact that there is a bill for the regulation of non-governmental organizations in Nigeria, and of course it's passed its second reading. It's at the committee stage, and we're looking forward to what would be made of the bill. But of course, it's the most we can take on the program today. We're going to be following up on this bill, but before the final decision is made on the bill, Barrister Olonade said that it's important that the government rises to its responsibility of supporting NGOs that organized and created with the best intent, and that NGOs continue to talk. Of course, the place of being the watchdog for the government, bringing into accountability and helping the government achieve all of its aims, all of the promises and make sure the people meeting the needs of the people. But again, there is the freedom to express yourself and of course form associations, which is contained in the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended. We'll look forward to what is made of this bill, of course, and then we'll let you know. But of course, again, we will have to call it a wrap on the program today. Thank you very much for watching, and of course, thank you very much, Barrister Olonade, for coming.
Thank you very much.
My name is Olajumoke Babalola. Do have a wonderful day and a Merry Christmas.